Hello everyone, welcome to Laodang Civil. Today we talk about the Second World War when Japan invaded China. What was America was doing then? China's northeast area was called Manchuria, also the place where China's Qing government originated from. Here was a large amount of fertile soils and natural resources, including mines, forests, and agricultural products. In early time of Qing dynasty, China's Han ethnic people were not allowed to move into this area, so it was scarcely populated. Later, large China's territories north of Heilongjiang River and east of Yusri River had been taken over by Russia, including Sakhalin Island and Haishenwai. It's Vladivostok, were recently approved as port for China's domestic trade. As China's neighbors, Russia and Japan, had lusted and fought for this area, whether Russia first, Japan to return China's Liaodong Peninsula, Russo-Japanese War in 1904, the battles of Lake Kherson and Kharchin Go in 1938 and in 1939, and Soviet Red Army entered Manchuria in August 1945. And defeated about 600,000 Japanese armies. Japan had a long plan to occupy Manchuria as a first step to take over China. And America actually permitted this area as Japan's sphere of influence. The Lanshin-Ishii Agreement signed in November 1917 between Japan and America agreed Japan's special interest in Manchuria, which made Japan more greedy. On September 18, 1931, broke out Sino-Japanese military clash. More than 10,000 Japanese armies attacked and occupied Manchuria very soon. It was said the same night of the incident, Zhang Xueliang, the commander of China's troops there, was enjoying the Peking Opera. More than 100,000 Chinese soldiers withdrew to inner lines without any resistance. The government of Republic of China and Nanjing under Jiang Jieshi was busy in fighting with the Communist Red Army in Jiangxi, which was regarded as a greater danger and a threat to the government more than Japan did. As to Japan's aggression and occupying of Manchuria, Chinese government just appealed to the League of Nations, hoping big powers' mediation. The year between 1929 to 1933 were Great Depression time to America and Europe, and America's Hoover administration was troubled in dealing with its economic crisis. Nothing interested in China's affairs. President Hoover opposed to military actions, even without consideration of any sanctions to Japan. U.S. military was not ready for war, impossible for military assistance to China. An American envoy for China Affairs remarked that he didn't see any issue, even if China's Manchuria taken over by Japan in the future. On December 10, 1931, the League of Nations established a Leighton Commission by China's request to investigate in Japan and China's Manchuria. On March 9, 1932, the pseudo-Manchukuo state was set up under Japan's tutelage, and Puyi, the last emperor of China's Qing Empire, became the puppet emperor of the Manchukuo. Later, the report by Leighton Commission was released in Geneva, blaming Japan's intensifying military clashes in China. The report admitted Japan had a special interest in China's Manchuria, yet it was illegal to have a puppet government under Japan's control. It recommended Manchuria and could have more autonomy, yet without damage to China's sovereignty and territory. Japan refused to accept and withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933. On September 3, 1932, U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Joseph Grew, telegraphed to U.S. State Department, believing Japan would absolutely cling to its militant policy. For the Manchukuo issue was regarded as critical to Japan. U.S. State Secretary Henry Stimson also showed American policy to the League of Nations that America would not impose economic sanctions to Japan, yet it would not acknowledge any treaty and force that harmful to American interests or U.S. citizen rights, the harmful to China's open door policy, which were Stimson's non-recognition policy to Japan. Now, about the war materials export to Japan. On August 7, 1937, Gerald Nye, North Dakota Republican senator, complained to U.S. Congress about more export of pig iron and steel to Japan. He said, "It's no more secret as to where these war materials will go. Most of them to Japan and used for war. The big companies had got huge profits from it. Yet it might also happen that one day these pig irons will return to America and to our younger generation, but in the form of shrapnel." Unfortunately, what Nye said came to be true. On December 8, 1941, Japan raided Pearl Harbor, and the irons America exported to Japan turned to be Japanese bombs to America. During the 10 years from 1931, Japan-China clashes to Pearl Harbor raid in 1941, Japan and America were close trade partners. The 48 of U.S. export to forest went to Japan, and Japan took 21% in American imports as the U.S. third largest import country after Britain and Canada. Japan relied heavily upon war materials such as oil, iron ore, metal, cotton, wool, rubber, paper pulp, and chemical products. If America, Britain, and France had imposed trade embargoes earlier, then 70% of Japanese foreign business would be in trouble. Since Marco Polo Bridge incidents on July 7, 1937, Japan engaged in overall military operations in China, and America also faced Japan's threat in the Pacific. On July 15th, U.S. State Secretary and Carter Hall stated that any war in the world might impact American interests. On October 5th, 1937, President Roosevelt made a quarantine speech in Chicago against any war, yet unwilling to engage. As to the Sino-Japanese War, American public were isolated and neutral against Japan's aggression, sympathetic to China, hoping China united and self-defensive. Yet its first priority was to maintain American interests rather than to help China. On December 12, 1937, at China's Yangtze River, Japanese bombers damaged an U.S. battleship and 3 oil tankers from Standard Petroleum Company, with 3 Americans killed and dozens injured. Washington just protested. Japan glossed over as an accident and agreed to compensate. From May to June 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Western Europe. In July, U.S. President Roosevelt signed a bill that's prohibiting more than 40 war materials from export, yet without iron and oil on the list. Until the fall 1940, Japanese army occupied Vietnam and allied with Germany and Italy. U.S. government imposed more embargoes. Yet oil export to Japan continued until to July of 1941, that only 5 months left to Pearl Harbor raid. It can be seen that in the decade from 1931, Japanese aggression of China, to 1941, the breakout of Pacific War, China had been fighting against Japan in hard times and by its own force, without substantial economic or military assistance from America. On the contrary, Washington had been busy in doing business with Japan by exporting iron ore and steel and petroleum. They're actually pumping up for Japanese aggression in China. Then only in 1942 and in 1943, when wars in Asia-Pacific area, China, India, and Burma, that America began its support to China via the road from Burma and air forces like Flying Tiger. Especially in November 1943, after a Cairo meeting by the leaders of China, America, and Britain, the plans was made for joint military operations against Japan until its unconditional surrender. Also, with Dick's mission, later as a U.S. military observation team was sent to Yan'an for possible cooperation against Japan. Some points we can learn from this period of history. First, a country should be self-defensive, far more being vulnerable and always concessional, in case of opponents being more greedy and aggressive. If Japan's military challenges had been stopped in 1931, then the further invasions into China might have been avoided. To this point, the Soviet Red Army realized so in the battles of Lake Kherson and Kharchingo in 1938 and in 1939, the Soviets punched the Japanese army with formidable forces, prevented its further attacks to the Soviets in the east, and secured more forces in the west against Germany. Besides, a country should be self-reliant. Don't depend too much on other security promise. For each country works for its own interests rather than for those of others. From 1931 to 1943, for the 12 years that China was invaded by Japan, and America didn't help too much, only until Japan that raided Pearl Harbor and became the common enemy to China and America. The two countries finally stood together. American foreign policy has been for its own national interest rather than for those of others. In 1931, China lost its northeast with a Manchu state established, to which America felt nothing serious. In 1937, Japan invaded further into China, and America had nothing more to do. In 1949, China's nationalist government lost the whole mainland of China. America had to let it go. Then today, if Taiwan returns to China, whether in peace or in force, what will America be able to do based on its own interests? The only choice might be wait and see. Above is today's program, and thanks for your time, and see you next session.